There's a type of conversation that happens without sound, without presence, without real witnesses. It's the kind you have with someone who isn't there, but who has never left your mind. You organize sentences, choose words, imagine reactions. And for some reason, this absent person listens to everything more attentively than any real person could. If any of this sounds familiar, know that you're not alone. And if you ever want to share your experience, the comments section is open. It's strange how the mind creates invisible audiences, how it transforms silence into dialogue, how it fills absences with voices that never answered, but somehow never stop listening. This silent habit exists in almost all of us, and perhaps it's more common than any real conversation you've had today. Mental conversations that continue even when the person never responded. Sometimes a conversation ends in the real world, but continues for days inside your head. The other person left, hung up the phone, stopped responding, but you didn't stop. You're still there, responding to what they said, correcting what you said, imagining what they might have said if they had stayed another minute. It's not that you're obsessed. It's that the human mind doesn't like incomplete dialogues. It needs to finish sentences. It needs to close cycles. So it creates what's missing. Fences. Avant continuation. Or can never happen. And suddenly, you're talking to yourself, but with the feeling that someone is listening. This kind of mental conversation doesn't need a microphone. It doesn't need physical presence. It happens on the way home, in the shower, before bed. And the curious thing is that, in those moments, the absent person seems more real than when they were by your side. Because now, they don't interrupt. Now, they hear everything. Then the conversation continues, silent, endless, until another real dialogue begins, and, for a few hours, you forget that you were still talking to someone who is no longer there. Phrases rehearsed in my head for dialogues that may never happen. You've already prepared answers for conversations that don't yet exist. You've already organized arguments for discussions that may never happen. You've already imagined what you would say if someone asked, if someone confronted you, if someone finally wanted to know the truth. And even knowing that this moment may never come, you continue rehearsing. The mind does this like someone preparing a script. It tests phrases, adjusts tones, chooses words that sound firm but not aggressive, words that express exactly what you feel without sounding too vulnerable. It's as if you were preparing for a trial that only exists within you. And in this imaginary court, you always have time to think before you speak. There's something comforting about that. In real conversations, words come out awkwardly. Timing fails, emotion gets in the way, but in your head, everything flows. You say exactly what you need to say. The other person understands perfectly, and for a few seconds, you feel like you finally managed to express yourself, even if no one heard you. These rehearsed phrases are kept stored away, waiting. Perhaps they will never be used, but they exist, ready, like letters never sent. And perhaps the goal was never to send them. Perhaps the goal was simply to know that, if needed, you would know what to say. The feeling of relief when saying something without having to hear the reaction. There's a kind of relief that only happens when you speak without anyone responding. When you say everything you need to say, but don't have to deal with the awkward silence. The unexpected defensiveness, the look of disappointment. You simply release the words in your mind, and they stay there, without echo, without consequence. It's strange how this works. You can say harsh things, difficult truths, thoughts you would never dare to verbalize, and at the same time, you feel a weight lifting, as if the simple act of formulating the thought were already enough, as if the mind accepted this internal version as valid, even without real witnesses. Perhaps that's why so many people prefer this type of conversation, because it offers expression without risk. You can be honest without being judged. You can be vulnerable without being seen. You can vent without having to explain why you feel that way. The imaginary person never questions your reasons. They just listen, and when it's over, you take a deep breath, not because you solved anything, but because you said it, even if only to yourself. And sometimes, that's all the mind might not. Just silent listening, internal discussions where there's always time to choose the right words. In real conversations, you never have enough time. The words need to come out quickly. The other person is waiting. The moment passes. Then you say something you didn't mean to say, or forget what really mattered. But tunnels, gym is yours. You can pause, restart, rephrase as many times as you need. It's like having an editor inside your head. You try a sentence, don't like it, delete it, and try again. You test different tones, different angles, until you find the one that sounds exactly how you wanted. And in this process, you're not interrupted. You don't need to defend yourself before finishing your thought. You simply construct the perfect sentence. There's a sense of control in that. In the outside world, conversations are chaotic, unpredictable. People react in ways you didn't expect. They misinterpret, get offended, change the subject. But in your mind, you control the dialogue. You choose when to speak, when to be silent, when to back down. And that brings a strange peace. Perhaps that's why these internal discussions are so frequent, because they offer something the real world rarely provides: clarity. Even if it's just the clarity of knowing what you should have said or what you will say. If you ever have the courage, moments of solitude filled with an imagined presence. Loneliness isn't always empty. Sometimes it comes accompanied not by real people, but by presences the mind summons. You're alone in your room, on the street, on your way, but mentally, someone is there, listening, watching, witnessing your existence in a way no one else does. It's not madness. It's imaginary companionship. It's the mind creating a silent spectator for moments that no one else sees. You think of something funny and imagine telling that person. You experience something sad and imagine how they would react. And somehow, this makes the moment less lonely. Les invisibles d'esprit, someone civic. Someone you knew, someone you lost, someone you longed to be near. Or it can simply be a vague figure, an ideal listener who never judges, never tires, never leaves. It exists because you need it to exist, because complete loneliness is too heavy to bear alone. And so you continue, walking, thinking, living with someone who isn't there, but who, in a way, never left. Because as long as you can imagine a presence, you will never be completely alone. Repetitive thoughts, as if someone were actually listening. There are thoughts you repeat, not once, not twice, but many times, as if you needed to explain them again, more clearly, more forcefully, as if there were someone on the other side who still didn't fully understand. And you persist, you rephrase, you try again, even knowing that there's no one there. The mind works like this. It doesn't easily accept that certain thoughts remain only within itself. It wants to share. It wants to be understood. It wants validation. So it creates a listener, invisible, silent, but constant. And to this listener, you repeat the same stories, the same justifications, the same anxieties. It's as if there's an internal jury that needs convincing. You present your arguments, revise your reasons, defend your choices, and with each repetition, you hope something will change, that the thought will finally make sense, that the guilt will lessen, that the doubt will dissolve. But it's still there, begging to be said once more. Perhaps repetition is the mind's way of processing what cannot be said aloud. It transforms thoughts into silent mantras, and as long as there is someone imaginary to listen, these mantras continue, echoing, insisting, waiting to finally be understood, organized, emotions speaking to someone who isn't there to interrupt. Feelings rarely arrive organized. They appear confused, mixed, overlapping, anger with sadness, relief with guilt, longing with resentment. And when you try to explain them to a real person, they become even more confusing because the other person interrupts, questions, interprets, and suddenly you don't even know what you were feeling anymore. But when you talk to someone who isn't there, something changes. You have space. You can start from one point, move to another, go back if you need to. You can say, "I'm angry," and then correct yourself, actually, "I'm hurt." And nobody will say you're being contradictory. Nobody will rush your conclusion. It is in this interrupted silence that emotions begin to make sense. You name them. You separate them. You understand where they come from. And by doing this in your mind, without the pressure of being understood immediately, you organize yourself. Not for others, for yourself. Perhaps that's why these imaginary conversations are so necessary, because they offer something rare: time to feel without needing to explain, time to process without being questioned. And when you're done, the emotions haven't disappeared, but they have form, they have names. And that's enough. The mind creating silent witnesses to what was left unsaid. There are things you've never said out loud, things that got stuck in your throat, choked by fear, shame, the wrong moment. But the mind won't let them disappear. It needs someone to know, so it creates witnesses. Imaginary people who hear what you never managed to say. These witnesses don't need to be real to be important. They validate your existence in a way that silence alone cannot. Because if something remains only within you, never to be shared, it's as if it never happened. But if you could even menally to someone who existed, it was real. The mind transforms unshared memories into narratives, and every narrative needs a listener, so you tell it to that vague figure, to that invisible presence, to that imagined version of someone you'd like to know. And in telling it, you're not seeking advice. You're not seeking answers. You're only seeking to be seen, even if only by yourself. And these witnesses remain, kept silent, like mental archives of everything you carry alone. Because sometimes what wasn't said needs a place, and the mind offers that place with awe, without a real audience. The strange intimacy of conversing without the risk of rejection. There's an intimacy in talking to someone who will never reject you, who will never judge you, who will never turn their back mid-sentence. In imaginary conversations, you can be completely honest without fear. You can admit things that would embarrass you. You can express feelings that would seem weak, and the imaginary person simply accepts it. It's a strange kind of intimacy because it's too safe. There's no risk. There's no real vulnerability. You open your heart, but no one can hurt you. You expose yourself, but no one is there to see your flaws. And perhaps that's exactly what makes these conversations so appealing. They offer connection without danger. In the real world, intimacy requires courage. It requires showing parts of yourself that could be misinterpreted, rejected, used against you. But in your mind, you control the reaction. You imagine understanding. You create empathy. And for a few moments, you feel what it's like to be completely accepted, even if it's only by an idealized version of someone. But this intimacy comes at a price, because the more you talk to people who aren't there, the harder it becomes to talk to those who are. Because real people don't accept everything. They don't always understand. And suddenly, true intimacy seems too risky. So you go back to the silence, to the safety, to those who never leave. The discreet habit of transforming silence into internal dialogue. Silence is never truly silent, not when you're alone with your thoughts, because the mind cannot bear emptiness. It needs to fill it. It needs to create movement. So it transforms stillness into conversation. And suddenly, you're speaking without sound, without a recipient, but speaking nonetheless. This habit is discreet. Nobody notices. You can be standing still in absolute silence, but inside there's a dialogue happening. You argue, explain, question, answer, and all this without moving your lips. It's as if you were two people at the same time, one who speaks, the other who listens, and both share the same mental space. Perhaps this is how the mind processes reality. It doesn't accept raw facts. It needs to narrate them. It needs to transform them into stories. And stories need to be told to someone. So it invents that someone, an invisible audience, a silent confidant, someone who is always available, always attentive, always present. And the habit continues, day after day, in empty moments, in brief pauses, in long nights. You transform silence into words, loneliness into companionship, absence into presence, because as long as there is thought, there will be dialogue. And as long as there is dialogue, you will never be completely alone, even if the only voice is your own. These silent conversations need no explanation. They happen because the human mind is, by nature, dialogical. It thinks in voice. It processes through words. And when there is no one to listen, it creates someone, not out of loneliness, not out of madness, but because that's how it organizes the internal chaos. You're not inventing people. You're creating mental space to process what you feel, what you think, what you don't yet know how to say. And that space is legitimate. It doesn't need real witnesses to be valid. It exists because you exist. And as long as you exist, These conversations will continue, silent, constant, profoundly human. Maybe you've never talked about this with anyone. Maybe you thought it was just you, but now you know. This discrete habit, this imaginary companion, this internal dialogue that never stops, all of this is normal. It's common. It's part of how the human mind survives its own complexity, without judgment, without diagnosis, just recognition. If this video touched you, consider subscribing. Here, we observe silent behaviors that are rarely spoken aloud, and perhaps, by recognizing them, they will become a little less lonely.